Well, hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Krobeck. I'm a recovered alcoholic. I usually, it's been a long time since I've seen Steve. We were outside trying to figure out how long it's been. And he almost died a couple of times since the last time I saw him. I got married and had a baby since the last time I saw him. So it's been a minute. I usually like to come a little bit earlier to these things, and especially whenever somebody gives you the opportunity to be the speaker. I like to come earlier, but I have my daughter turned 1 in March, and she's with my husband currently, and I don't know how many of y'all have kids, but leaving my daughter with my husband for an extended period of time usually doesn't end very well. I kind of have to be the person who runs in a little bit before things start and leaves a little bit after my duties are done because of my child. So, but no, it's an awesome opportunity to be here. I think I'd had the privilege of speaking here probably 7 years ago. And I'd gotten really sick the night before and ended up in the emergency room. And so I was on like Zofran and just dehydrated and don't remember most of it. So it's good to be back in Insane Mind. I love stuff like this. I love getting to see everybody and getting to see everybody together, especially after COVID. I think everybody's lives have looked so different for so long that finally being able to take advantage of the opportunity to get together in fellowship, I know has been such a bright spot in my life, and COVID really threw a wrench in that. So now any opportunity that comes about to get together with people in the fellowship is so much more special now. So much more special after COVID. And so anyways, I have my phone up here so that I don't go over time. But so I recently moved back from the Northeast. I lived in Philly for a while, and I did some schoolwork up there and ended up working in South Jersey for a while. And I got involved in a really, really awesome, solid home group in South Philly, and had a great sponsor, and we got to go around to a lot of different meetings, and she would end up speaking somewhere and I would end up being asked to speak somewhere, and in Philly, if I come here and tell you that I was born and raised in Midland, everybody, about 85% of the room has a context about what my life was like growing up. In Philly or in South Jersey or New York or wherever we were, I'd have to take about 10 to 15 minutes, explaining to people what Midland is like. So now it's weird coming back home and being here and not having to do that anymore, because all I have to do is say I was born and raised in Midland, whereas there everybody kind of turns their head, and I ask them, I'm like, well, have you seen Friday Night Lights, and do you know who George W. Bush is? Like that, you know what I'm saying? So that would kind of set the stage, and so now I don't have to do that, so I kind of have to fill up time with other things. But so I was born and raised in Midland, and also it's really weird to be considered like a what is it? Why is it YPAW? To be considered like the young people now, because I'm almost 30, which is weird. Which is weird in and of itself, right? Because I got sober when I was 20. I had the privilege of I bottomed out and I tapped out young. And, so I got sober when I was 20, which then, yeah, I was a young person. But I'm kind of sitting here and I'm like, I don't really know if I qualify for YPAW anymore. I'm almost 30 and I got back problems and all kinds of stuff. So to be called a member of the young people in Alcoholics Anonymous, I feel kind of cool about it, and also weird at the same time. But anyway, so I was born and raised in Midland, and let me tell you that if ever there was a setup to not turn out the way that I was, it was how I grew up. I'm the youngest and the only girl, therefore, my parents' favorite, naturally, most favorite and the most loved child in the family. Just kidding. But no, I'm the youngest of all boys. Both of my parents are normal in respect to alcohol and other with non-conference approved substances. You know, my dad works in the oil and gas industry. It's the only reason anyone would ever live in Midland. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom. You know, I didn't have the experience of, you know, of having a parent that was in and out, or, you know, having a drunk dad who would come home and beat on his wife and kids. Like, that was not my experience. And I bring that up not to give the illusion that my family's perfect or anything like that, right? Because we all have our stuff. Like, my family's not perfect. My family's had their struggles, like, you know, but my ideas of what alcoholism is and what makes someone an alcoholic were so skewed that it kept me sick for a long time, right? Because I grew up in a cohesive family, and you know, my family did very well for themselves, and you know, we grew up traveling. I went to the same school, like, you know what I mean. I had a very stable, very enjoyable childhood, and was pretty much set up to be nothing like I turned out to be. And it just goes to show you what the deal is about and what it's not about. And so, and ironically enough, one of my brothers is also in recovery. I think I want to say he's like 4 or 5 years sober now. He cleaned up when I had about 3 or 4 years, and one of my brothers will probably end up being sober at some point in time. You know, but that's, I grew up in Midland. Midland looked a lot different when I grew up there. You know, I went to a private school. I graduated with 38 people. I went to the same school for 15 years. Like, we all knew each other's grandparents and parents and all kinds of stuff. And, you know, there's not a whole lot to do in the thriving metropolis that is Midland, Texas, other than like watch football games and drink. You know, and that's just kind of what people did. But, you know, growing up, I mean, like I said, you know, I had a wonderful childhood. I have wonderful parents. And despite, you know, how everything was set up, there was still just something that didn't quite click for me. You know, I just always, and I think a lot of us relate to this, and I know a lot of the women that I have the privilege of sponsoring relate to it in the sense of, I just never, like, it was almost like my skin just didn't really fit. You know, I didn't quite feel right. I didn't quite feel like I assumed you guys felt most of the time. And externally had no reason to feel that way, right? And I understand my experience now very differently. And in the terms of, like, what is that? Like, it's a spiritual malady, right? It's that soul sickness part of us, you know, but at the time, like, I didn't know what that was. Like, I'm not a 6-year-old kid walking around being like, oh, well, I have a spiritual emptiness inside of me, and, like, therefore, like, I feel different. No, that's not how that manifested, right? How that manifested was, like, I felt different from you guys. I felt like I didn't quite fit in. And so what I did was I just tried to be and tried to act like and be interested in the things that I thought would make me feel like I assumed you felt. And would make me connect with you and feel the same as you and all these other things. And, like, spoiler alert, that never happened. That never happened, right? And I go around trying to fix my insides by arranging my outsides, and it just never worked. It just never lined up. Like, things for me just never quite felt even, right? Like, I always just felt like a couple ticks off from everybody else. And, you know, it wasn't anything crazy or super disruptive. And I did struggle with other things growing up. You know, I've been in recovery from an eating disorder for a long time. And, you know, it was just another way that things manifested, right? If I could only be like this size, if I could, you know, weigh this much, look like this, do that, like, then I would feel okay, right? Like, if then, it was like, I never had the ability to, like, just be okay and, like, fit in my own skin. And I just tried endlessly to find ways to make that happen. And, you know, so like I said, growing up, wonderful experience. I'm close with all of my family members. I'm close with my brothers. We traveled a lot, had a lot of fun memories, all kinds of stuff, did well in school, had good friends. I was an athlete. And, then come around like, I don't know, like maybe 15, when I kind of emerged out of the state of like braces and acne and, just the terrible state that is adolescence. And, I got my braces off, my skin cleared up, and, and I get into high school and in Midland, because there is nothing else to do in Midland. It was a big deal to be invited to like a senior's like Halloween party or like, stuff like that. And so I had never drank before. I had never used anything else. My poor parents, like, bless them, they tried so hard to introduce alcohol to our family normally, right? And so kind of what that looked like was, if we're having a nice dinner, or, my mom's a wonderful cook, if she like made this like Mexican fiesta, and, they'd let us have like a couple of sips of whether it was like their wine or a couple of sips of like their margaritas. And, and of course, like 2 out of the 3 of us who are now sober, are sitting there being like, can I have another sip? Can I have a little bit more? And my parents are like, dude, no, like you're 12. Like, no. So that's what that looked like in my house. My dad, I use this as an example for later, but this is the kind of drinking that I grew up around. So, my dad used to drink, he stopped drinking like the first time I went to treatment, like just stopped. But when he did drink, right, he used to drink, Cabo Wabo tequila. And so, this is what his experience would look like, right? He would get out the bottle of Cabo Wabo tequila like once a year during tax season, right? He'd get out a glass, he'd pour out about this much of it, and he'd set it in the freezer, right? In like the middle of the afternoon. He'd mow the lawn, he'd walk the dog, he would swim in the pool, do other things, and then he'd come home at night, and my dad's a big hockey fan. He's originally from outside of Chicago, so he's a big Blackhawks fan. So he'd set up his taxes on his desk, right? He'd turn on the hockey game, he'd mute it, he'd get everything lined up, he'd get his Cabo Wabo tequila, mind you, that's been sitting in the damn freezer for 9 hours. He'd set it on his desk, he'd sip on it and nurse it for maybe 3 hours, maybe get through half of it, and dump the rest of it down the sink, and not do it again until next tax season. Right? Like that's the kind of drinking that I grew up around, right? And then my mom is kind of like the classic, like has like 1 glass of Chardonnay if she's feeling frisky, she has like 1.5 and then falls asleep in front of the news. So that's the example that I had, right? And so they tried so hard to introduce alcohol to us normally, and it just kind of took a little bit differently for me and one of my brothers. And I've talked to my brother, like he doesn't care if I talk about him and his experience. And so so we're the kids who are like stealing wine out of the box in the fridge, and like we're like hanging our mouths over it and pouring it and like running around not getting caught, and then they go to try to get wine and there's none left, and they're like, what happened? We're like, oh, and we're like 12. And but up until that point, like I had never been exposed enough to enough alcohol to ever have felt the effects, right? It was always just like the taste. And so I get to the age of like 15, and of course, like I'm talking to this like senior boy, because there's always a stupid boy in the picture. And, and me and one of my best friends in high school who, she was one of my running buddies for high school. We get invited to the seniors Halloween party as like, I want to say I was a sophomore, which like in Midland, like as sad as it is, like that was a big deal, right? It's like a big deal to get invited to the seniors Halloween party, and he was going to pick me up in his truck and like all kinds of stupid stuff. And, and so me and my best friend at the time are sitting there and we're like, we're going to get drunk. We're going to drink. Everybody else is doing it and, whatever. And so, we get to this party. I go dressed as a Christmas tree to a Halloween party, naturally, just producing confusion, like from the rip. So I'm like dressed as this Christmas tree, and they slide a pack of Keystone down the table. Classy drinker, all the way. Like give me a handle of Kentucky Deluxe and a 30 of Keystone, and I'm good for like 2 days. Never a classy drinker in my life. And so they slide this Keystone down, right? And we pop a couple of them off, crack the tops, like take a couple of sips. We're like, this tastes terrible. What do? We drink the entire 6-pack. You know, and then other things come, right? Like we start taking shots of vodka and we're like drinking Alizé and like smoking weed. Like, I mean, just like, but what happened for me in that moment, right? Because I was like 105 pounds soaking wet at the time. Like you throw like 6 Keystones into my body, I was hammered. What happened to me in that moment though was really, really magical in the sense of the first time that I felt the effect produced by alcohol, right? Steve mentioned being rocketed into the 4th dimension, right? Like what happened for me in that moment was magical, right? Like the background noise in my head stops, right? The committee that's constantly chattering in my head stops. And I found, I got treated at a level that I did not know that I needed to be treated. And for me, what happened was I finally found out the reason why people drank. I was like, oh shit, you know, this is how I assumed everybody else felt, every day. And for me, I had just found the thing that lets me feel that way. You know, I had been looking to feel that way my entire 16 years of life. And I found it in some Keystone cans. You know, it was all of a sudden like, I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't concerned about what people thought of me. I was funny. I was pretty. We took pictures. I made a bunch of friends. Like, it was like finally, somebody described it as like having walked around like a clenched fist my entire life. And all of a sudden, like, my hand just releases, right? It was like all of a sudden my skin fit, like, all just from drinking a little bit of Keystone. And so, you know, and it proceeded the way that you can probably assume, being one of us, it proceeded, right? I drank entirely too much, you know, threw up in the dude's truck, peed on my friend's driveway, like, had a great time, right? Like, it was awesome, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and paint the picture that I did not have fun while I was getting loaded, because I did. It was awesome for like 4 years. And then it wasn't. You know, but I had a great time. It was awesome. I could not wait to do it again. You know, and I don't have the experience where like I got drunk once and then the next day, you know, I'm drinking every day from sun up to sundown. It's not my experience. I had a really pretty natural progression, and what it looked like from there was anytime I had the opportunity to drink going forward, I did. You know, when I drank, I usually drank too much and made bad decisions. And, you know, so all of a sudden it goes from like, okay, well, like we're going to drink a little bit on Friday night to like, well, let's throw in a Saturday. And, you know, like Thursday is always a fun option. And, you know, I went to a small Christian school in Midland, and you know, like, why not see who can get the drunkest before chapel at 10 o'clock in the morning? Why not? You know, starting to drink and do other things before school. And, you know, it was just like, and it makes sense in the sense of like, I found the way that I wanted to feel my entire life. And so, like, of course I'm going to do it. Of course I'm going to do it. I wanted to feel that way 24/7. You know, and so any opportunity to drink or do other, you know, primarily drink, but do other stuff, I did. And, you know, I had mentioned earlier that you know, I had, obviously, like I was 16, right? Like I didn't have an understanding of what alcoholism was. You know, so in my head, because obviously it didn't last too long before it went from like, you know, and Bill talks about it in our book of like becoming the unwanted hanger-on, right? It went from like, I was a fun person to have at parties, right? I was a fun person to be around and drink with and all this other stuff, like to a point. And then eventually, like, you raid enough people's bathrooms and their prescription pills, you steal enough of their cars, you get alcohol poisoning enough times at their house, like you get the cops called in, like to where people don't want you around. Right? Like, it went from like, hell yeah, invite her, to don't tell her we're coming over to somebody's house. Right? Like, don't mention it. You know, because in my head, like, I'm convinced, like, you want me at your party. And it's like, no, No, it got to a point where like I became a liability. And so, but I was so misinformed and not understanding what was going on, that when people like my parents or teachers or college advisors or whatever are like, what's going on, buddy? Like, what's going on with the partying? We're hearing some stuff. Obviously, like you're getting alcohol poisoning like every other day of the week. What's going on? And I'm like nothing, right? I was not one of those, and I got to this point, right? And I think most of us, at least I did, most of us do, but right, like I had friends. Right? I was an athlete. I was part of a company. Like I did well in school. I got into every college I applied to. Right? So I'm sitting there and I'm like, you can't tell me that I have a problem because look, right? I'm not flunking in school. I have friends. I'm doing all of these things. So like to me, it was like I couldn't be touched. And like nobody, primarily like my family and some other people, could argue with me, right? Because it's not like I graduated high school with like a 3.8. I got into an awesome college. Like, I had myself so built up to where I had every excuse as to why I didn't have a problem, not understanding that has nothing to do with what alcoholism is. And so things just progressively got worse, right? Like sophomore year of high school was awesome. Junior year kind of started to get questionable. Senior year was a disaster. I got really sick. I was drinking entirely too much. I stepped into other stuff, and it became one of those things where it's not that alcohol ever stopped working, right? Alcohol will always do its job, right? Alcohol will set me free to a certain degree. It just didn't free me up as much as it used to anymore. It wasn't as fun as it used to be anymore, right? It went from a fun, like, volition to a necessity, in the sense of, like, I started getting to the point where I was so used to, like, feeling free that, like, I stopped being able to exist in the world, like, knowing how free I could be, right? Free in the sense of, like, substances, to where, like, life was already really unpleasant sober. And it's even more unpleasant sober when you know that there's something that will help you not feel that way, right? But it stopped lasting as long. It wasn't as fun. I started having more consequences. I started getting sick and all kinds of stuff. And, so I graduated high school. And like, here's kind of what happens in Midland. I don't know where y'all are from, but here's kind of what goes on in Midland. So people graduate high school from Midland. They go to Texas Tech. They usually get put on academic probation after their first semester because they're partying too much. They join a fraternity, whatever. So then they get off of academic probation. They usually get a girlfriend or a boyfriend, whatever floats your boat. And they realize, like, oh crap, I'm on academic probation. I'm going to get in trouble. I better start, like, reining in this partying mentality, right? So they rein it in. They get into a serious relationship, they establish a major, they get married, they graduate, and then, like, become people like my parents, right? Who, like, maybe drink a little bit too much at the lake, like, every couple of months. And I think everybody was just kind of hoping that was going to be my experience. And like our book says, right? Like, everybody's just kind of sitting there, like, awaiting the day that I rouse myself from my lethargy, right? And just stop. And like that never happened. That never happened, and it was never going to happen, right? But so there was kind of this breath of fresh air of like, oh, like, cool, like I graduated high school, I'm going to move on to college and get it together. I moved off to college and I lasted a semester and I tanked because I got to the point where now I have no friends. I don't know how to make any friends. I'm so miserable. I'm walking around this college campus dying internally, drinking every day, like, just bad stuff. Not knowing that my life could be very, very different. And, so I attempted to move off to college. I lasted a semester. I had to go on medical leave. And then I started going in and out of treatment, mainly for some mental health stuff. Not realizing that, like, hey, if you're, like, drinking yourself to death, like, usually, like, depression kind of, like, accompanies that. Right, but that's not what I was being taught, and it's not to move into like a, hey, let's hate on the treatment industry. Like, that's not really what I'm about. That's not really what I'm going to purport. But, you know, there was a degree to the sense of like, I wasn't being taught what alcoholism was, right? I wasn't being taught that, hey, buddy, like, cool, you got into a school, but like, I'm horrified 24/7. I cannot function in this world sober. I have no ability to show up to be helpful to other people. Internally, I'm miserable, right? And that none of this external stuff has anything to do with what makes somebody an alcoholic. Nobody was telling me that, right? And you know, that's where the beauty of the fellowship is, in the sense of like, I didn't need somebody to pat me on the head and tell me like, you know, well, you weren't really like emotionally nurtured as a child, and that's why you find your solace in alcohol and whiskey and making terrible decisions, right? Like, sure, my family has their stuff, right? Like my mom's the product of like a really violent home. My dad's parents were from Poland, and his dad died of a heart attack when he was 15. I don't have the most like emotionally available parents that have ever existed. But goddamn, y'all, like my parents would breathe for me if they could, right? Like, my parents did everything that they could to give us everything that we ever needed and more. And like to sit there and be like, well, like I drink because like my parents weren't invested in me emotionally. Like, get out of here. Like, get out of here. I drank because it made this internal condition that existed long before I ever drank. It alleviated that. And like, it just so happens that when I drink, I lose the ability to control how much I'm going to drink. Like, that's not my parents' fault, right? And I'm not going to sit here and minimize stuff because, like, I've been through stuff and I have my own experiences. I have trauma. Did it make things worse? Absolutely. But, like, I had to get down with the fact that, like, nothing made me the way that I was. My decisions put me in terrible positions. And as a result, like, no, alcoholism is not caused by family. Alcoholism is not caused by anything, right? Certain things can make it worse, absolutely. But what I needed to learn is that, like, physically, I handle alcohol I have a very different physical experience with alcohol than my dad does, right? Never in my life have I ever experienced the ability to nurse a drink for 3 or 4 hours and dump half of it down the sink. I mean, shit, y'all, I wouldn't have even poured it in the glass. I would have just popped the bottle off and drank it. Not wait for it to get frozen because I like how it tastes better when it's cold. Like, what? That has never been my experience with alcohol. And the reality is, it never will be. It never will be. I will never physically process alcohol the way that my father does, ever. Whether I'm married, whether I have a baby, whether I make $200,000 a year, it will never happen, right? But that's not what I was being taught. Until I ended up in a lot of treatment over the course of probably 2 years, every like 4 to 6 months. Like, I just couldn't, because it was a lot easier for me to hide out in treatment, right? Like, I can do treatment. Put me in a facility for 60 days, give me a bunch of cigarettes and a bunch of new friends, and I'm fine, right? Consistent food, a nice bed to sleep in, people to pat me on the head, tell me I'm doing my best, like making relapse prevention plans that are 52 pages, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, one of which, like, my warning signs of relapse was excessive drinking, y'all. I mean, seriously. Like, that's what I was learning. And again, these are well-intentioned, wonderful people, but they weren't understanding what I suffer from. They didn't understand the disease. And not their fault, and it's a hilarious and embarrassing part of my experience, but it's been helpful to a lot of people, right? So I ended up in this facility, where, you know, they exposed us to the book the way that we're intended to be exposed to it. You know, where they were teaching us about things like the allergy, right? Of how I'm physically different from other people, in the sense of, like, when I start drinking, like, I get thirstier, right? Like, when I start drinking, like, I need more. It doesn't turn into this, like, oh, I've reached my limit. That is never something I will understand. You know, because to a certain point, the more I drink, the more in control I feel. And I never realized that was abnormal. Then obviously when your, like, BAC hits like 0.3, it's a little bit of a different story. But, you know, so they're sitting there and they're exposing us to the allergy and to this, aspect of being mentally powerless over alcohol, and, you know, how that twisted thinking, like, doesn't occur to other people, right? They're exposing us to the book, the first 164 pages of the book, the way that we were intended to be exposed to it. as well as like, you know, we were getting therapy and horse therapy, which how walking a horse through an obstacle course is going to help me stay sober is something I'll just never understand. Whatever. It doesn't matter. But, you know, so we got exposed to the book and you know, and it was really cool the way that they did it, because ironically, the woman who had the displeasure of teaching me the book is still my current sponsor. That woman has had the displeasure of sponsoring me off and on for about 9 years. You know, and so they take us through the book and they essentially like envelope us long enough to have an experience with the book. Now, I was at that facility for a long time, and I can't tell you if I just kind of went along with it because I wanted to look cool and sound cool, like I knew the book, because like they praise that kind of stuff, right? Or if because like my sponsor just really scared me at the time and I wanted her to like, I don't know. But the reality for me was like I did an honest run through the work, right? I learned all this stuff in step 1 and had some cool realizations that were important in step 2, and I did an honest and thorough 4th step, right? Like, bless my sponsor, I had like 72 people on my resentment list. I mean, I was ridiculous. You know, I got honest with her and I did my 5th step with her and I did 6 and 7 and experienced the obsession being removed, right? Experienced not being afraid of drinking while also like not being tempted, right? In the sense of actually being free for the first time from figuring out how I'm going to drink or how I'm not going to drink or how I'm going to go to the grocery store and like not see the beer aisle and then like end up on a 6-month run. You know, so I experienced the obsession. I experienced freedom for the first time ever. And then I got to steps 8 and 9 and I made amends to my parents, right? 2 people who are morally obligated to love and forgive me. And then I called it good, right? It was like, God knows my heart. I don't need to pay you back the money that I stole from you. I don't need to make amends to you. God knows my heart and we're fine. You know, but the point that I'm trying to get to, right, is like I made a couple of amends. I had a really beautiful active life in 10 and 11 in terms of prayer and meditation and pausing when agitated or doubtful and writing nightly review and doing all of these things and all of these disciplines that we're taught how to do. And I got a little buddy at the treatment center, right? So what they did was once we were in sober living, we had gone through the work and done our 5th step, they let us start taking the new people through, right? So what they're doing, they're teaching us how to sponsor while also like kind of keeping eyes over us in the process. And, you know, so I had a couple of buddies and whatever, and I did that for a while, and I got free and got a cool job at McDonald's, and I was taking the bus and all this other stuff. And then I got a boyfriend. Like I mentioned earlier, right? There's always a boy in the picture, and, you know, so I got a boyfriend from the men's sober living, and we exchanged numbers on the bus and would meet up like in private at the freezer section in Walmart. It was like real romantic. Mind you, like, we're breaking all the rules, right? Because we're not supposed to affiliate, fraternize with each other. This island is 7 miles long and half a mile wide. They knew exactly what we were doing. But they were giving us the opportunity to see it on our review, right? Like, talk to our sponsor about. They were giving us opportunities to learn how to practice these principles, right? And so I was not about it. I didn't want anything to do with it. I didn't want to get honest. And they were, you know, they started putting the heat on. So I decided to move out of sober living. I'll spare you the story. I relapsed. Big shocker. And I went on kind of the run that would end all runs. And you know, ended up basically when I ended up getting sober, I was 20 years old and I was living in a back house in Dallas with a dude I met in rehab. Thriving. I had to eat like 5 Xanax to be able to roll over and look at him every morning, right? Like, that's where we were. I mean, sun up to sundown, right? Because AA had ruined my ability to find oblivion, right? And I'm not going to sit here and say that like it didn't work anymore and it didn't treat, because it did. It absolutely did. Alcohol will always treat what it's designed to treat, right? But it's really, really hard, and I hate cliche expressions and all this other stuff, but it's really hard to have a head full of AA, because I was at that facility for a long, long time under a very, very fundamentalist AA lineage. I had a head full of solution and was hammered. It is horrible. It is a terrible way to try to exist. Because I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is the allergy, this is the allergy, this is the allergy. And I'm like, oh my God, it's the obsession, right? Like, I'm starting to see it. But the reality is, you guys, like, I was 20 years old, right? I did not want to go to the stupid meetings. I did not want to sponsor. I did not want to buy into the idea that I could never drink again, right? And some people can come in and hear this. My best friend is a beautiful example of this, right? She came in, she heard the solution, she was sold on it, she will celebrate 10 years sober in September, right? That wasn't my experience. I came in, heard the solution, was like, well, you know what? I have no experience with being able to do anything normally, but like, damn it, I'm going to try. Because for me, I was one of those people where it was like, I needed to be convinced by my own experience first, before I was going to jump into this. And, you know, so I get to the point where I you know, like I said, I'm living with this dude and I'm 20 years old and I'm waking up every single day wondering why it can't just be done, right? Why it can't just like die essentially. And, you know, and I think I take advantage of the fact a lot that I never struggled with knowing that the 12 steps worked, right? Because when I was exposed to the 12 steps, I wasn't exposed to the, you know, just, you know, put your butt in a barrel and wheel it to a meeting and like call your sponsor every day. That's not the AA that I was exposed to, right? I was exposed to like solution in the way that it was intended to be taught in the book. And I knew that the steps worked. I just didn't want it to be my reality. And so, you know, I think that that's something that's a really big gift that I was given, that I think that I forget to remember a lot, is that if we can expose people, right, disturb their questions and theories on alcoholism, right, you know, then there was no qualms for me in the sense of like, I knew where to go. I knew what meetings to go to. I knew who to look for, right? Going to a big book study and finding the one person in the room who actually has a book at a big book study, right? And asking, because like, I'm not going to, yeah, no. So going to a big book study and finding the one woman in the room who brought a book to the meeting, right? Who I can walk up to and say, have you had a spiritual awakening as a result of the 12 steps? Because that's what I was taught to ask, right? And so this woman took me through the work and she got me through really quickly, right? Because she was armed with the facts about herself and about this disease in the sense of that she knew that I was dying, right? I'm 20 years old. I had to go back to my parents' house. I detoxed at my parents' house, you know, and the only place that I knew where to go was here. I didn't need to go to, I probably should have at least gone to detox, but I didn't. Whatever. You know, I went to my parents' house and detoxed there and found a woman in the room, and I met with her every single day, and she got me through the work in 2 weeks. And we went back through line by line and did it thoroughly and all this other stuff. But she was armed enough to realize that like I was at that window where I was willing to, she could have told me to light my skin on fire and I probably would have at least tried. Because I was done, and she saw that and she took advantage of that and she got me through as quickly as I could to get me to the point where I had protection, right? Because I wasn't in treatment. I left her house and I went home. So, you know, God forbid, like some insanity comes in and I find myself hammered in the Sonic drive-thru, 24-ounce Miller Lights deep, not knowing what happened, right? So she got me through the work. She got it through really quick. She told me to write inventory. I wrote it. She told me to go to, you know, to meet her at this meeting. I met her. She told me to pray, and I prayed because I knew that that was all that was left for me. And because of that, and you know, she had a lot going on. You know, she was in a really nasty divorce. She had a bunch of kids, and she invited me into her home, and she picked me up for meetings and all kinds of stuff. And you know, I don't know if she's still sober. I have no idea. I don't know where she's at. But you know, she played a huge role in me getting well, in me getting right. And you know, my life. I tanked really hard, really fast. Like third generation alcoholic, right? I didn't stand a chance. But you know, my life also turned around really fast and got really, really powerful and lit up by the power that I got connected to, right? Like, I ended up with an awesome opportunity to, just by happenstance, by the woman who was sponsoring me, ended up talking to somebody who was here at Tech, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, I'm 3 weeks sober, living in sober dorms, going to school. And got welcomed into a community surrounded by people who had, a fair amount of time in recovery, who were sponsoring other people and pursuing education, and, got a part of this really cool home group and got to sponsor a bunch of people and change sponsors and do all this other fun stuff. And, experience going to a football game here for the first time, like being able to walk past tailgating and have it not be an issue. And I'm like a month sober. And I come home from that football game. I go back to my dorm, that football game, and I fall to my knees and I'm just sobbing because I'm like, oh my God, like it's real, right? Like it's real, it works. And like this is how my life can look every single day for the rest of my life, so long as I uphold my end of the bargain, right? Like I was taught within probably the first 60 days of my sobriety how to keep my spiritual condition fit, right? How to stay active in 10 and 11 and to continuously sponsor people and be a part of a group and all this other stuff. And that I can stay sober and not just sober, right? Because sober for me was always a punishment, right? Sober for me was always just a ticking time bomb until I could get loaded again. But I could be in recovery, right? Which is very different than being sober. Like being in recovery and being free, and I could stay that way, right? And and that's been a lot of my experience now, and life just blew up and turned into this beautiful thing that I just never imagined, right? Because when you go from not being able to imagine more than I would have given anything for just one day to not think about how I'm gonna get drunk, or how I'm going to get what I need, or how I'm going to try to stay sober, or how I'm going to hide. I would have given anything at a certain point in time to have just a day of that, right? And that has been my experience every day for almost 9 years, right? Because of what I learned in the book, and because I had a sponsor who said, dude, your problem is that you're a selfish human being, not because of anything else. You deliberately manufacture your own misery, and you can either continue to do it or you can get free and get connected to God. What do you want to do? And because of that, I got married, and you ever want to figure out how spiritually fit you are, fucking get married. Get married to one of us. Let me put it at that. Get married to one of us. Because you sign up to marry a whole third person if one of y'all gets sick. Yeah. So, I got married. I had a baby. My brother's in recovery now, right? I graduated with my bachelor's degree. I moved up to Philly to get my master's. I lived in Philly for 4 years and worked in Camden, New Jersey. And moved back here, and I'm about to have my doctorate, and I have a family and a couple of dogs, and I sponsor people who are getting married now and having babies and sponsoring people on their own and going to school and building this life that's not just I don't know how I'm going to stay sober. I don't know how I'm going to stay sober. I've got to find a meeting. I've got to call my sponsor. That stuff's important, right? I love meetings. I love my sponsor, all this other stuff, right? But it is so much bigger than that. There's a lot more work to be done, and it's so much bigger than that in the sense of how AA and recovery has changed my family and, the life that my daughter will have now as a result. It's really, really unbelievable. But so much of that starts with having somebody who's willing to sit down with you and give you their time and show you what the solution, one, what we actually suffer from, right? And two, how you get and stay free from that. And because of that, and because of people who have been willing to stay in the solution and in the fellowship, I had the opportunity to get sober when I was 20. I'm sponsoring a woman who's 15, right? Who's heard about recovery. Why? Because her mom is sober, right? I've started to see kind of just how far out the tentacles go just when one of us gets well, and the impact that the solution can have, right? And that's just a very zoomed in picture. Sometimes I'd like to think about kind of God's view of things, right? Of how much we really do impact. And I know that that's not ever something that I'll have the ability to know, but damn, it's cool to be able to see it just from my own personal life and my best friend's life, my brother's life, and all this other stuff. But I'll always be thankful for the solution that I was given. And that's why I'll always continue to do stuff like this, or, you know, take somebody through the work or sit down with somebody, right? Because like that's where the deal is. Because without that and without the power that we get connected to as a result, like none of us would have any of what we have. So I think that's time. So that's all I have. Thanks.